It was a gathering of media professionals, civil society advocates, and legal minds as the International Press Center marked the 14th anniversary of Nigeria's Freedom of Information Act in Abuja. At the heart of the conversation were the gains, prospects, and ongoing challenges of the FOI Act 14 years after it was signed into law. Speakers at the event, including media executives and rights activists, acknowledged that the act has empowered journalists and citizens alike to demand transparency and accountability from public institutions. They, however, expressed concern that many government agencies still frustrate access to public records either by ignoring requests or hiding under the guise of bureaucracy, and advocated sensitization.
But beyond those specific objectives that are outlined in the law, it was also envisioned as a tool to enhance transparency, to promote public participation in governance, and to combat corruption, simply by granting members of the public, including citizens, and I do this deliberately to make the point that it is not only citizens who have a right to use the law. So it gave members of the public a legally enforceable right of access to information held by public institutions. So 14 years after its enactment, I think it's legitimate for us to embark on an undertaking to make an honest assessment of how well the Act has fared in the context of these objectives that are apparently very lofty. And it seems to me that at the end of such an exercise, we can say that the Act remains a landmark legislation whose full potential in Nigeria's quest for transparency, accountability, and good governance is yet to be realized. I don't know of anybody who thinks that that has been realized.
You don't have to be a corporate body. You don't have to be an NGO person or civil society. As an individual, you can actually write. And even there's a provision in the FOI that says if you are not literate enough, you can actually walk to the desk officer and say, I want this information.
The former governor of Ekiti State, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, who received an award at the event, opined that upholding transparency may not necessarily lead to accountability. Hence, all hands must be on deck to demand accountability from political leaders.
I don't believe there is anyone who comes into government with the feeling that, look, I just want to go and steal. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't think so. But sometimes, processes, procedures ultimately don't produce the right results. And you lose money in the process. That is lack of value for money, which may not be intended, but is the result. How do we cut down on this? And how do we even cut down on bureaucracies? I mean, we've been talking about the Oronsaya report in this country for the last decade. Instead, we are adding more agencies.
The House spokesman and chairman of the House Committee on Media and Public Affairs, Honorable Akintunde Rotimi, cautioned that as we push for transparency, we must confront every threat of misinformation which can undermine trust in public institutions and distort the information being sought.
However, 14 years on, the implementation of the Act continues to fall short of its potential. One major area of concern is Section 29 of the Act, which mandates the Attorney General of the Federation to submit annual FOI compliance reports to the National Assembly. These reports, though they exist, are often submitted late and often lack critical information. So I'm aware as well that most times the reports always have details of compliance, but always, most times, leaves out details of non-compliance. This reflects deeper structural challenges: lack of institutional ownership of the FOI compliance process, inadequate funding and capacity for FOI units within MDAs to meet the requirements, weak or absent enforcement mechanisms, and a culture of impunity around non-compliance. This status quo is unacceptable, and I believe that's the reason we're here today. A law that cannot be enforced or that is routinely ignored fails in its core purpose. And citizens' access to public information must not be conditional, it must be guaranteed. I must also mention, that we also have to collectively, as we push for transparency, also confront the growing threat of disinformation and misinformation, which undermine trust in public institutions and distort the very access to information that we seek to improve. In the digital age, information is no longer confined to government gazettes or newspaper columns. It travels instantly, multiplies rapidly, and if unchecked, misleads easily. Disinformation, often state-agnostic and algorithmically amplified, is weaponized to erode public trust, influence electoral outcomes, and polarize societies.
Earlier in his welcome speech, the executive director of the International Press Center, Lauren Arogundade, had called for a renewed commitment to upholding the spirit of the FOI Act, noting that freedom of information is key to strengthening Nigeria's democracy.
Since its enactment on May 28, 2011, the question of whether the FOI Act has achieved the intended transformative effect persists, given the significant challenges ranging from weak compliance by public institutions to limited awareness and enforcement mechanisms. The relatively low rate of usage by journalists, civil society groups, and even citizens in general has also been a concern. Yet, it remains a fact that the FOI Act constitutes a critical tool for transparency, especially in electoral processes and democratic governance. This is why one of the goals of Component 4, support to media, in both phases of the European Union Support to Democratic Governance in Nigeria program, led by the International Press Center and the Center for Media and Society, is to raise awareness among the media and encourage the use of the FOI Act to improve accountability. These expected results feeds into at least 3 out of 6 others for these components, and these are the enhancement of the professionalism of media practitioners, particularly women, the enhancement of media's professional capacity to deal with electoral misinformation and disinformation, and the diversification of media platforms to enhance their ability to deepen the coverage of the electoral processes and provide civic and voter education.
While the Executive Director, Center for Media and Society, Dr. Akin Akingbulu, said a lot still needs to be done to ensure effective use of the FOI Act. He urged journalists to remain relentless in using the FOI Act as a tool for investigative reporting and public enlightenment.
The Freedom of Information Act plays a crucial role in promoting electoral transparency and accountability by allowing Nigerian citizens to access information from public sector, especially those related to campaign finances, voter registrations, and electoral results. Since 2011, now 14 years, Freedom of Information Act has been empowering citizens of this great country, journalists, and civil society organizations with power to access government-held information, including of those related to election. It is important to note that the new norm in Nigeria is that government is open to transparency and accountability in carrying out its business. Briefly, I'm going to make the reference to how FOI can be used to encourage electoral transparency and accountability. One of the uses is access to campaign finance information. Citizens can request and obtain information about campaign funding, including donors and amounts, and how funds are spent. This will ensure that electoral fundings as provided by the law is complied with. Also, Nigerian citizens can also use FOI to access voter registration data to help prevent what we always call overvoting and underage voting. The next one, I'm going to look at electoral results and data and audit data. Citizens can use FOI to request information about election results, including votes count, audit data, and any irregularities that may have occurred during the election.
As the FOI Act clocks 14, the call is clear: uphold the right to know, deepen transparency, and protect the watchdog role of the press.